Bwana asifiwe. Looks like we're already getting late. Fortunately, the speaker is already introduced in the morning. Not only by me, but by the message. He preached a message, and I believe that through that message, you know him. Bwana asifiwe. So, I believe he's going to talk about, we agree to talk about something to do with family property. Family property. And he has a freedom to mention what he feels he wanted to mention. Because actually, by the way, the issue of property is very wide. Very wide. So he will touch what the Lord will help him to touch. But I believe that what he is going to share is something relevant to all of us, whether it's couples or people who want to inherit their fathers or their mothers, or people who want to know how to handle their property. Bwana asifiwe. So I would like to put our hands together and give him a heart welcome to come and share with us. Karibu.
Amen. Thank you so much, Rev, again for this opportunity and the leadership of the church for allowing me to have another session. Now I'll do it professionally, yeah, because we agreed with Reverend that I will talk about a few things in terms of property, and I believe that we will be blessed. As we've said, or rather as the word of God has directed us today, from the book of Proverbs, chapter 13 and verse 22, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children and his children's children. That is our anchor verse today. That is what we shall be anchoring our discussions on. So I will talk about these issues from a legal point of view so that we understand the issues to do with property in our families, in our lives. Because we've talked about inheritance today, kingdom inheritance. And now I would want to talk about the physical inheritance, because the kingdom inheritance consists of not only the spiritual aspect of what we've talked about today in the morning, but also the physical aspect, which is fruitfulness and multiplication. One of those things is, of course, property. So let me just talk about property that has been inherited first, or property that is gotten from inheritance. Now, this is property that belonged to person A. Let's say your grandfather, they moved it to your mother, and then we're talking about us who are in the third generation. Let's start from there. So what happens in such a case? Now, the Constitution of Kenya allows for inheritance of property that is from a lineage. Yeah. I hope the ushers have also given out the papers so that we can have questions being written down while we go on, so that if there's anybody who has a question, thank you. Thank you so much. Feel free to ask any question. I'll be able to answer based on how God is going to assist me. So the Constitution of Kenya allows for inheritance of property based on lineages. So your father had property, or the grandfather, your grandfather, let's just start from there. Your grandfather had property, sent it out to, or rather gave it out to your mother or your parents, and then there is us. And then, of course, after us, there are our children, because these properties belong to us and our children. So what happens in that case? The Constitution allows for that. And that, the kind of property that is inherited, you don't pay tax for. Let's start from there. Because when you buy property, for those who've bought property, there's something called, for the people who are selling property, there's something called capital gains tax. And for the person who is buying, there's something called stamp duty. Now, stamp duty is calculated at 4% of the value of the property if it is within a municipality or a city. But then if it is an agricultural property, it's calculated at 2% of the value of the property. So when you inherit property, you didn't buy it. Sindio, you didn't buy it, somebody gave it to you. So you're not purchasing that property. In real sense, you're being given a property as a gift. So you're not bound to pay tax. The only thing you will pay is a registration and nominal capital gain, nominal tax, which is about 240 shillings for stamp duty. So the Constitution allows for the devolvement of property from families. That is where we start. Now, it is legal for an individual to devolve their property the way they want. Again, that is very crucial to note. However, the Constitution is keen on having equality when it comes to distribution of property, because this is wealth. We're talking about wealth. Let's say, for example, you have 1 acre piece of property that originates from your parents or from yourself. And you have, I'm just going to give you an example that is easy to do. You have 4 children. You have a property that you want to leave your children, 1 acre. It means the 4 of them, each of them is going to have how much? A quarter. Whether or not they are female. And this is what I want us to be very careful about, because I've met people who say that women should not inherit property. So the Constitution changed that, because when we voted for the Constitution in 2010, it changed that narrative. So all children can and are due for inheritance. So it is not just a reserve of the male children, also for the female children. And the most important thing is equal. There is an equal distribution of this property amongst the surviving, we call them dependents, equally. Now, a good case in example, again, I'll talk about this. You have property from, let me start now from the grandfather. Left property to you. You had siblings. One of the siblings or 2 of them pass away. They are entitled, they are still entitled to the property. So what happened? What happens? In such a situation, the children will also do what? Inherit that property. The children of the deceased will be due for inheritance of the share of their deceased parents. Again, I'll repeat it again. There's one property that comes from a grandfather. There are children. Now, this is now a second lineage. Children. These children, the grandfather has bequeathed or given out these children property, to these children property. One of the children, or 2 of them, die, unfortunately. So their children, if they had children, those children will be entitled to do what? To also receive a share, an equal share of the property belonging to their parents. I hope that is clear. Now, there are 2 ways that property can be given out. Number 1 is where there is a will. We've talked about the Bible being our will, yeah, as Christians today in the morning. But now I'm talking about a physical will that has been done. And this is one of the things that I would want us to also embrace. Now, in the Kikuyu culture, unfortunately, or where I come from, when you're told to do, or rather before, prior to us understanding how things work, when you were told to write a will, most people told that they were being told to die. Now you're dying. So when you're dying, you should write a will so that you know what, you put your house in order because you're dying. I want us from today to do away with such kind of thoughts. When you do a will, it means you are putting your house in order in case of any eventuality. It might be today, it might be 20 years from now. But then what a will does, a will states how that property is distributed. How that property is distributed. Now, again, we go back to that example of the grandfather. The grandfather has property, has a 1 acre piece of property, has the children. We talked about the 4 children. The grandfather can decide to do a will while he's alive and say that for child 1, they will get this. Child 2, they will get this. Child 3, they will get this. Child 4, they'll get this. Now, again, now we move on to, again, a rather complex issue, slightly complex than what we're talking about. Where there is only one property, you can say this property should be divided into 4. That is very easy. But then what happens when there are several properties? There is money in the bank. There are shares that we buy, different companies. Again, what happens? You have businesses, you're running a business, you have a company, you've registered a company that you're running. This company also, somebody must take it up. So what happens in that case? That is where now a will becomes very crucial to do. Because now you sit down, rather the grandfather would have sat down and said, I have Shamba A. In Rwai, I would want child A or child B to get that shamba. Now, the other properties are in different parts of the country. I would also want these other children to inherit this. And the aspect of bequeathing property or giving out property is totally dependent on the person who is giving out. So you cannot be forced to giving out whatever property to whoever you want. Now, I'll give a very awkward example, but it's true. The white people, most of them, sometimes they even give property to their cats and to their dogs. That's what they do. Anasema, I have a favorite dog, inaitwa Bosco, let's name that dog Bosco. So Bosco is going to get $2 million. For what? To me, from where I stand, that is wastage, because that money would have been put into better use. So since in our African setup, we don't do that, there is an importance of ensuring that these properties are well documented. So you sit down and say, you count the cost of your estate. This is what I have. This is what the grandfather would have done. This is what I have. I'm now going to distribute it to my children in this manner. So he puts it down, signs it, it is registered. If a will is not registered, then it is not effective. Yeah, so however it is that, wherever it is that you go, if a will is not registered and it's registered at the Registrar of Documents in Nairobi, it is not a valid will. It has stamps, it has to be stamped, and it has to be registered for it to be a valid will. So that will can now, when you go to court, after, we call them the testator, after whoever writes it, who is called the testator, is dead, now you take that document to court and say, this person wished for his properties to be distributed in this manner. So it makes things very easy, because everybody will get a share based on what the testator wanted. Yeah, so that is one way where this property that is inherited, for example, can be distributed. The other way is where there is no will. So because of old age, maybe an accident happened, whoever it is that wanted to distribute the property did not write a will. So what happens? Now, things become slightly different and difficult for this reason. The surviving children, we go back to the example of this grandfather. He had children. he died. He didn't have a will, for example. Now, these children have to sit down and agree on how the distribution will be made. This is where now fights come in. And may God help us so that we don't fight over things, so that we plan ourselves as accordingly. This is where fights come in. Because people will sit down. Let me give you another example now. There is property here in Roy. Maybe a quarter an acre now goes for approximately between 4 and 5 million within this area. So he had a property here in Roy, let's say 2 properties worth 5 million each, that's 10 million. But he also had property in Kitisuru, for example, or had property in Umoja, but that property is a commercial building, yeah, for example. That property is earning, I'm just giving you examples, about 900,000 or 600,000 per month in rent. Another property elsewhere in Runda, property is valued at a quarter an acre, is valued at about 80 million. With the house, 300 million. So you can imagine the kind of chaos that will be in that family when the children sit down and decide who is getting what by themselves. Yeah, because maybe one person will wake up and say, okay, fine, I want the Kitisuru property. That is about 300 million. Then the others are going to ask him, okay, why do you want that? Why can't you take the Roy property that is worth 5 million? That is where fights begin. That is where fights begin. Because the thing that now will happen in such a situation is that when they go to court, the court will most likely, if people are fighting, most likely, I've seen this because I've done this for quite some time, the court will say that those properties should be divided equally. So you can imagine all those properties are going to be sold, and then the money is divided equally. You have lost your wealth. Because, for example, if you're selling, sometimes if you're selling in a hurry, you will not sell at the best price. You will sell at the fourth sale value because you just want to get the money and go. Of course, again, at the end of the day, you will have sold out your inheritance. Because, for example, you had a home, where you call a home. Maybe the home was in Kitisuru. Maybe the home was here in Roai. But because you have not agreed amongst yourself, you get to a point where you have to sell so that you can fit in to a certain issue. Those are the two ways that property can be distributed from an inheritance point of view. It can either be through a will, which is more or less a bit proper and helpful for us, or without a will. Where there is a will, and I'm not saying that where there is a will, people will always fight. There are families that agree and say, okay, you want the 300 million one, you take it. Let me get the 5 million one. And people are okay. And that is what the court is going to allow to happen. But where there is a will, for example, and this is something that I would want us to encourage ourselves to do, regardless of whether you have one property, whether you have one matatu, whether you have a business, one business, try to think about it, because it's going to save you a lot of money, save your family, your children a lot of money, a lot of headache when you're not there. You cannot control what will happen when you're not there. It's true, right? But you can control what happens to your property when you're not there. That is through a will. Now, when it comes to a husband and wife, there is something called matrimonial property. And this again has become a very, very tough subject for some time. Reason being this: prior to 2010 and prior to some decisions by the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court recently, matrimonial property, which is property that has been accumulated by husband and wife in the existence of their marriage, was deemed to be shared equally when, for example, death occurs, or in a very in other circumstances, which of course happen, divorce. I will not be oblivious of that fact. Of course, we are not advocating for divorce because God hates it. It's scriptural. God does not allow, or not allow, he hates divorce. That is what the Bible says. But if it happens, what happens to property that has been acquired through the existence of the marriage? Now, prior to 2010, such kind of properties were divided halfway on a 50-50 basis. There was a decision in court by a family called a Charia versus a Charia. Now, the court said that regardless of whatever it is that the family, the man has brought in, the wife, even if the wife was not working, was a stay-home wife, the wife was entitled to half of the property in the event of, for example, divorce. Now, I'll also go on to say something else in terms of this kind of arrangements. You might find a man who has several women, or a family that you came from a family where there were several houses, because it was rampant. It was rampant before we actually knew Christ. That is what was happening before. People used to marry, and unasikia mzee ako na nyumba mbili tatu. And some of these houses you come to know when mzee is being buried. So unaona mtoto pale unashindwa, mtoto anakaa kama wetu kidogo. He looks like us. And true to the facts, they are part of your family. So what happens in terms of matrimonial property? Now, prior to the Constitution again, those properties used to be divided based on the households. Let's say I'll use the example of the grandfather. Again, your grandfather had 4 wives. And these 4 wives, 2 wives had 2 children, 2 wives had 5 children each. Now you fall within the children, tuseme wale wawili, because tumeokoka Bwana asifiwe sana, tuseme sisi wengi, the 2 children. You are your father and your sister and your auntie from the same house walikuwa wawili. Now, what happens in such a situation? The properties, if there was no will be divided based on the number of children in that house. So, there are 4 houses. 2 houses have 2 kids each. 2 houses have 5 kids each. So the houses with 5 children will get a bigger share than the houses with 2 children. Are we together? We've understood, tumefika hapo tuko sawa. The 2 houses with 2 children will get a significantly smaller share than the house with 5 children. That is the law. So in the event that has happened, for example, in your family, because I know there's a possibility that it has happened somewhere, that is how the distribution is going to be done. So you can't claim that now because we are 2 and these other ones are 5, it must be divided equally. Now, matrimonial property in an ideal Christian setup where there's only one wife, and let's say for one reason or the other, mzee is not there, or even the wife, let me just say the wife as well, because even wives can own property. Yeah, that's what you said, okay? The women can also own property. So either of the spouse is not there. What happens in such a situation? Where you live with your husband, where you live, and that is, if that property belongs to you, you're not renting it. That is what is called matrimonial home. So if either of the spouse were to, for example, die, let me use an example of mzee because mzee is common. If the husband dies, then the woman or the wife has what we call a life interest in that property, that specific property. Meaning this, what does life interest mean? It means nobody can come and uproot them. Unasikia leo tunakuja nasema that my brother ndio alikuwa amekuoa, so hii nyumba ni yetu. So they come and remove the wife, wanasema this is our home, wewe enda, we are coming to take over this property. That legally cannot happen. Are we together? Because in that property, the surviving spouse, who is now in this case an example, the wife, will enjoy a life interest in that property. Nobody can ask them to go anywhere until they die. And of course, when they die, they're not there. So now the thing herein lies another problem. And this one affects men, mostly men. But there are women who wanaguziwa mahali kidogo, but I'll just say it. You hide property from your spouse. Umechukua kachama for the women. I know our mothers are very industrious. Wamekula chama mahali, wameambiwa kuna plot, kuna zingine zinagawanywa huku Kantafu, 50 by 100, go and ballot. You go and ballot and you don't tell your spouse. You take another one, kuna zingine zimeitaniwa mahali fulani Thika, kuna nini certificate mahali, you don't tell your significant other. Now when you die, what do you think happens to those properties? Most of them are subject to vandalism. Because if those properties are not known, then they cannot be transferred to your children. And especially wanaume, I hope tunasikiza kabisa, because if you hide these properties, and even for women, if you hide these properties from your spouse, you're doing them an injustice. Because if you're not there for one reason or the other, and these properties hazina mtu, what happens? Zitakaa for companies that are, let's say, I won't say God-fearing, but companies that are fair, for example, they will take those properties to Unclaimed Financial Assets Authority. So they will now try to look for your surviving spouse and children. But for companies that are not true, I know we are in the area of Embakasi Ranching. If you have property here, you know the problem that was there with Embakasi Ranching. Because that office has been a source of pain for so many people, but there are people who've also gotten legit titles from them. So for example, if you got a property from them, you get a certificate, you hide that certificate from your significant other. For whatever reason, if you're not there, for whatever reason, more often than not, if it is that office, that property will not get to you. Not just that office, other offices, because in the absence of a title, because a title is registered by the government. Yeah, because there are other properties that, and I believe when we get more time, Rev, we can talk about now the different kinds of properties. When you have a title, the title is registered and known by the government. But for a share certificate, that is only known by the company that now organizes for what? For those properties. So there is no other place that you can go to get a record. Because if you want to buy a property, very quickly in terms of now for the young people who are here, if you want to buy a property, what do you do first? You conduct a search. Now, for everyone who has a property in Nairobi, there is something that is called RD Sasa. You can write it down for those who have property in Nairobi. Now, even if it's not in Nairobi, it's coming to you soon. What the government has done, the government has changed the registration system from manual to digital. So when you see, for example, when you buy a car through the Teams system, yeah, you just go to the Teams online, e-Citizen, go to NTSA, you click transfer vehicle. You put in the other details of whoever it is that you want to sell it to, you key in the details, and then you transfer. So land in Nairobi has also moved, yeah, to that system. And land in this area as well, where we are in, because this is still Nairobi, has also moved in that system. So what you need to do is you register those properties with RD Sasa. You create an account. You can create an account from any cyber. or if you have young people, for example, for older generations who might not be able to understand the system, when you go to ardisasa.go.ke, you will get the details. You can open an account there. Now, when you open an account there, when you do a search, the search is going to be online. So I'm talking about what you need to do when you're buying a property. And this is now for the young people, because I know you'll also want to own property at some point, not just for the young people, but for all of us. You conduct a search. When you do a search, from the Nairobi point of view, that search is going to be on the Ardisasa platform. So it's going to be almost automatic, because if the property is registered, when you click search and the other person accepts to have the property searched, you're going to get a document that shows you a search immediately. For properties that are not in Nairobi, you'll have to conduct a manual search at the registry where that property is registered. Let's say, for example, Machakos, because Machakos is closer to us. Machakos, you have to do it physically. You have to take a copy of the title to the registry, get and obtain a copy of a search. That search will show you who owns that property. Now, the Supreme Court recently said that it is not enough for you to do a search only. It is not enough, because things happen. You can do a search, but when you go to the ground, hakuna shamba. So what do? You must get a surveyor. You must get a surveyor who will show you that this property is here. And what do they do? What do they use? They use a map. You can get the maps to any property in this country at the Survey of Kenya, along Thika Road, or the respective headquarters of where you want to buy a property. You can get a map to that property. So when you get a surveyor, what does that surveyor do? That surveyor will come and buy a map on your behalf, because you might not know what the property is all about. But the surveyor is going to buy a map. They're going to bring it to you, and they're going to take you. Don't show them. Don't show them where the property is, please, because some of them are unfortunately con men and women. Tell them, you go and buy a map. This is the map. My property is within this area. Take me to my property. If they don't take you to the property that you are buying, then you automatically know that you're being conned. So it is not enough for you to only do a search. You do a search, you ask for a copy of the map, you have a surveyor's report, and you also look at one document that is very crucial, but most people ignore it. It's called the Ndongo report. The Ndongo report, if you search online, you will get the Ndongo report. The Ndongo report consists of properties that were earmarked either for government or public land, but they were moved to private property. So you'll get all those properties, the block numbers, all of them are there, because you need to do your due diligence. The fourth thing you need to do, talk to the area, the neighbors within the area. Talk to them. Just knock on a door. If there's a neighbor there, I want to buy this property. Does this property have an owner? Does it have an owner? What do you know about this property? Does it have a court case? Soon, we'll be able to know whether properties have court cases, because the system is being worked on. But before then, talk to the neighbors. Ask around, so that you get as much information as possible that you can get about that specific property before you decide to buy it. Because a neighbor might save you from a loss of about 10 million, 1 million, 5 million. They will tell you, hey, e property, there is a case. There's an ongoing case. Tafuta tuwe jua. Of course, there are some who don't do it with good intentions. But if you do your research based on what you've been given by the area members, you'll be able to know whether this property is ripe for purchase or not. Yeah, so you cannot, when you do a search, once you do a search, of course, the other thing you will discover from the search is whether or not that property has what we call encumbrances. Encumbrances are loans, for example. Yeah, mtu anaweza chukua, because when you buy property you can go and get a loan using that property. We do that, sindio? We do that all the time. So when a bank or a financier gives you a loan, for example, that loan is going to be registered on that property. So when you do a search, that is one of the most important things you do. When you do a search, that loan is going to be registered on that search. Itaandikwa, the property belongs to Paul Thuo, but there's a charge. A charge is what now talks about the amount of money that is owed to a financial institution. So there's a charge for 4 million shillings by whichever bank or whichever institution. So that is what is going to show you whether or not you can commit to buying that property or not. Because sometimes what happens, somebody will come and tell you, hii property iko sawa, I am in a hurry, na I use her for let's say a property worth 10 million being sold for 2 million. You'll be like, yeah, this is a very good deal, especially for us as business people. This is a very good deal. So you'll go ahead and pay the 2 million shillings. You've not done a search, you've not done anything. By the time you're doing a search, then you realize, oh, there is what? There's a charge. So the bank cannot release, because once a charge is done, once a bank or a financial institution gives you money, they take the original title with them. So you can't transfer that title to anyone for anything. You can't transfer it. So you can imagine you've given out your money, your 2 million shillings. The bank still has the original title. You can't transfer it. You've lost your money. So that the search and the due diligence will help you to ensure that you don't intentionally, I'll say intentionally, because sometimes when you come to my office as an advocate, if you give me documents and you've done a search, we have the maps, I might not know whether there's a fraudulent activity or not. But if you don't do it through the rightful channels, like tomorrow, for example, I'm giving you an example. Tomorrow I'm going to Kwale down at the coast. I have a case that I'm doing where about 15 people bought a property from 2 individuals. But that property, they did everything. The search, the map, they have all the documents. But then there's somebody else who showed up and said in 1982, they bought that property from somebody else. So you can imagine, if you haven't done your due diligence, if you haven't gone through the right channels, you can imagine you've bought a property, you've built. This is property that you'd wish to, transfer to your children, transfer to your generations. Then somebody else comes and says, in 1992, I bought this property from person X. So all these people who have built here, and there are 15 of them, 15. So this person wants to take that property from them. And those properties are really prime. But because we have documents, we went through the right channels, we'll just go and tell the court, whatever this person is saying, we don't know. Here is our evidence. We did a search. The search showed that this property belonged to person X. We did the agreements. We went to the registry of lands. The registrar of lands okayed these documents. The transfers were okayed. But if you don't do your due diligence, you will lose out. Now, this is for us who want to purchase property. I don't know whether we have questions until that point before we go on. Maybe we can take a few questions because of time. I was told that I need to be conscious of time because we've also been here for quite some time. I don't know whether there are questions. I can take a few questions as we go on based on what we have talked about so far. Yes, sir. If you did it without knowledge, then you'll be conned. That is basically conmanship, because it is assumed that you will do your due diligence, including looking at that report. So the only thing you can do is to sue whoever it is that sold you that property. That is the only recourse you will have. Yeah. But you can't get that property. You can get the recourse in terms of suing whoever sold that property to you, but not getting that property. Because it is assumed that when you're buying a property, you must do and conduct your due diligence. Yeah.
Are there costs to register a will? If yes, how much? What are the requirements or procedures?
Very quickly, yes, there are costs, and they vary. They vary from one advocate to the other. Reason being, when we charge for our services, we charge our services based on a percentage of what you're bringing to us. So when you come to my office, for example, I will ask you how much is your estate, is your net estate worth? If it's 50 million, I will charge you based on the 50 million. So it varies from one advocate to the other. Now, what is required? You require copies of titles for all of the properties that you have, if you have them, or copies of share certificates if you have them, bank account details, personal effects, because there's some other people who have paintings that are expensive, clothes that are expensive, machinery that is expensive. So you need to have a record and a list of all of them. The third thing you need to do is to have a list of the beneficiaries. Who are these beneficiaries? Are they going to be your children? Are they going to be your grandchildren? Because you can decide to give whoever you want your property. But remember, the first thing that you need to do is to distribute the same equally amongst your children. That is the first thing that you do. However, and this is now quickly, you can decide not to give one child for whatever reason. Maybe, I use this example, but it's not a very good example, but I'll use it because it happens. You are sick. One child has been taking care of you. The rest don't want anything to do with you. So you can say in your will that because this child has taken care of me, and these other ones have done nothing, I will leave my property to this one child. I don't encourage it myself from a personal point of view. But what I encourage is to try and balance, because for example, if you give out your children, you know them. Unajua there is somebody I can give 1 million, they will give me 20 million. Huyu nikimpatia 2 shillings, atanipatia 10 shillings. Na huyu nikimpatia 1 shilling, itarudi ikiwa negative. You know them. So when you're distributing these assets, you know how to distribute, but at least try and balance the same amongst your children. Yeah.
Write and register a joint will is the first question. The second one, what will be the best approach for an unmarried people who own property together but are no longer together and probably want to sell it in this case?
Okay. Now, for the married couple, thank you so much for those questions. For the married couple, you cannot do a joint will because a will is personal. It is personal to you as an individual. What I would encourage you to do is to have property that is jointly owned, because you can own property jointly with your spouse. So if it is a property that is owned jointly, because it's joint tenancy, what we call joint tenancy, and another one is called tenancy in common. Now, joint tenancy is where the two of you own property together and both your names are on the title, and there are no percentages or fractions. Because you've seen titles whereby person X owns 50%, person X owns 50%, or person X owns 80%. You can own property like that. For example, you can decide to buy property together, and since you want both your names to appear on the title, you can own that property together. Maybe you'll contribute 20%, the other person will contribute 80%. It can be written as such: 80% belonging to person X, 20% belonging to person Y. So as a couple, in order to alleviate a situation whereby you will have to do a will for properties that are jointly owned, you decide to buy property and have both your names there as joint tenants. Because when one person is not there, if you own the property jointly, the other person automatically gets a right to the property through death. But if it is owned in common, where there are percentages, when you're not there, the only percentage that will belong to you is the percentage on the title. The rest you cannot own. Now, for the young people who you're not together, you're no longer together, what you do in this case, ask the other party to sell that property. That is the best way to go about it. Or if it is large enough, because, for example, if you're talking about half an acre, have that property subdivided into 2 quarters. If it is 1 acre, have it subdivided so that the two of you can have different titles, as opposed to having one title where both of you are joined together. So what you do, either have it sold and the shares and the proceeds shared between the two of you, or if it is large enough property that can be subdivided, then you divide the same into what? Into the equal shares, so that everybody has their own property. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Now, thank you so much, sir. What happened to the percentage? It will now devolve to his children, to his estate, because that is personal property. It doesn't belong to the other party. So let's use a good example. You own a property with another individual. You own 80%, they own 20%, and then they die. So that 20% will not belong to you. That 20% will have to go through succession, what we've talked about. Whether there's a will, if there's a will, whoever it is that has been registered or to occupy or to have that property will now be registered as a new owner of the 20%. Or if there's no will, they will decide amongst themselves who is supposed to get it. Then they will come and replace the name of whoever died with the new name, but now that new name will be for 20%. So nobody will come and touch your 80%. But now you'll own property with somebody else, probably because somebody you didn't want to own property with. But because there are percentages, there's only so much you can do. Yeah, I hope that answers the question. Yeah.
In a case where uncles decided to sell the properties, and yet the children left by their brother did not get anything since they did it in a
Yeah. Now, you can challenge that decision in court. If somebody if you are entitled, for example, as we said, grandfather, then of course the children. Now I am assuming this is somebody who's asking this question is a young person because this is a third generation, yeah? So you can challenge that decision in court because we've talked about equality in distribution. So if one person was entitled and they were not there, they died, you as the children have the right to inherit. So if that property is sold illegally, you can challenge that in court and the court can give you reprieve. So I would highly encourage, if something of the sort happened, approach the court as fast as possible and state your case because the court is going to give you your rightful share. Yeah. Yeah.
What is the chance of winning a case for a disputed will? Reason for dispute is that the deceased left out some of his properties.
Now, that is very easy to win because as we said and we talked about it, the families will have to be, the court will have to bear in mind these are the families. But these families have to prove that they belonged to the deceased. Because there are some people who just come up and show up and say, you know what, we look like this guy. We saw tuliona kama ule Kibaki. We saw Kibaki. Tuliona Kibaki at some point. There was some guy who really looked like him. But if they cannot prove that they belong to that polygamous family, then they cannot inherit. But if they prove that this man who died was their father, then they can easily have that will annulled. Once that will has been annulled by the court or cancelled by the court, the properties will be distributed based on what we talked about, based on the families.
How expensive is it to prepare a will? Kindly elaborate the process the process of sharing.
Of sharing, I will assume sharing of the property. Let me assume that. Now, as I said, yeah.
Sharing property when alive, if a parent is alive.
Excellent. Now, how expensive, as we said, depends on your property and depends on the advocate you go to. But ideally what happens is that you will go to an advocate's office, you will tell them of all the properties that you have and give them the list of distribution. How do you want these properties to be distributed and to whom? Now, once you do that, the advocate is going to write that down for you. You will need two witnesses for the witnesses to actually see you physically signing that document. So if those two witnesses do not see you signing the document, that can be an invalid will. Number two, you would need two people, or no, between 2 and 4 people who are called executors. Now, these executors, what do they do? These executors are people whom, when you're not there, they are the ones now to take the documents to court on your behalf to have your wishes adopted by the court. These executors are what we call administrators when there is no will. So when there is no will, they are called administrators. When there is a will, they are called executors. So they are going to now, they're the ones to take those documents to court and say, this is what the late so-and-so wish to happen. And then, of course, they record the same on your behalf in court and sign all the documents that they need to sign. So you need executors and the two witnesses. Now, once that has been done, you will sign that document. That document will be taken to the registrar of documents in Nairobi, specifically in Nairobi, because they haven't devolved this system. Once that has been taken there, it's going to be registered. And I've said one of the important things you should make sure you've done is to have that document stamped. Because if it is not stamped as registered, it is an invalid will. I hope I've answered that question as well. In terms of distribution of property when you're alive, there is a provision in law called gifts inter vivos. Gifts inter vivos means you're giving out a gift while you are alive. Let's go back to the example of the grandfather. The grandfather has the children, and these children, he's pleased with 2 of them, and he decides, you know what, nitawakatia hii shamba when I'm still alive. It is allowed. However, they cannot be given more property if the others have not been considered after Mzee is dead. So there has to be an equality that is made, and that equality will bear in mind the gifts that were given out when he was alive. So you'll give out gifts, yes, when you're alive, it's okay. But when you're also not there, these gifts will have to count for something. Because they can't come and say, now mimi nilipatiwa property when he was alive, now that he's dead, I want more property. It doesn't happen that way. Yeah. A grandchild can only claim when the father or the mother is not there. That is the only time that a grandchild can claim. Because if the parents are there, then they are the first in line to claim. So the grandchild can, yes, claim if there are properties that are where the parents, the biological parents, are not there. What was the second question, sorry, about it? Property. No, the child cannot, because the property that you have right now is yours. If you decide not to give it to your children, there is nothing they can do. But we've talked about a wise father doing what? Leaving an inheritance to their children and their children's children. But But nobody can come and claim property that you sold as their property. No, 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 no. They can't. Because that property legally belongs to you.
What happens when the will is not properly administered and differ with the succession act?
If I'll assume there are illegalities. If there are illegalities in the will, that will has to be invalidated if they are invalid. But if it varies from the Law Succession Act based on distribution, we have talked about person X saying that this child of mine, I am well pleased with them, so I'll give them 80% of my share. If there are reasons, then that will cannot be invalidated. But if you just give out and leave out the rest, then that will can be invalidated. Yes.
If a parent has 5 pieces of land in different counties, which court can this case be taken for this matter to be addressed?
It will be taken to the court where the deceased last resided. So where they were, mahali walikuwa nyumbani yao, mahali walikuwa naishi, they will have to use that specific court, the court area, where the last place that he was known to live. Yeah.
How do you deal with a spouse who is so paranoid that is anything you respond, he pick the words and start a fight? Number 2, he keeps complaining about his son disagreeing with him because the son dares his point. The third one is financial conflicts between couples.
Okay, that is slightly different, but I'll try to answer it. Trust is earned in bits, but it is lost in ounces. Trust is earned in bits, but it is lost in ounces. What do I mean? That spouse must trust you because you have allowed them to trust you. If they don't trust you, if they know you're hiding things, they won't trust you. If they feel that you're hiding a few things up and pale, they will not trust you. So you need to allow them to trust you, not by word of mouth, but by actions as well. Yeah.
How do we do succession in a proper way, please?
Succession in a proper way. Again, if you can, for us who are here today, if you can, do a will. And I'm not saying this because of business. You can go to, the person of your choice. But if you're able to, do a will. That is one of the easiest ways to make sure that you do the succession properly. Because with a will, it is going to be very easy for the rest of, the beneficiaries to know these were the last wishes of our father. These were the last wishes of our mother. This is what we need to follow. But if you don't do a will, you leave chaos. You leave chaos. That is one of the biggest things that we are facing at the moment. Lack of proper wills and proper distribution. Yeah.
What were the problems encountered during making the Constitution? I think in relation to succession.
Okay. One of the problems that was there in relation to succession was the fact that some men felt shortchanged. Why? Because my wife will automatically inherit what I have from my father. They will also inherit what they are given from their father. But for a man you cannot inherit what has been given from your wife's side. Hapo kuna watu wameguzwa. Bwana asifiwe sana. So that is one of the biggest challenges. That was one of the biggest challenges. But now, since the Constitution said that even women can inherit, when your wife brings in those properties, uzichukue, sindio, wanaume, take them with joy. There's nothing wrong with it because the Constitution protects you as well. So that is one of the biggest challenges that was there while framing the Constitution based on the law of succession. Yeah.
Is it wise to bring my brother to a will with my wife and children for security?
For security, no. Why is he there? these are things for your children. For your children. Why don't you trust your spouse? Why don't you trust your spouse? The will, whether you have your brother there or not. And you see, this brother will inherit something that was not due to them. Let us keep it amongst the family. Your family, your nuclear family. That one is a straight no.
Which way to go when there is duplication of title deed? Two parties sharing a parcel of land.
Okay, the first question was a bit not clear. I think perhaps just go again, if you don't mind, Peter. Okay. And the second one again, Peter?
Which way to go when there is
To
duplication of title deed?
okay. In terms of where there are two conflicting titles, the first one that was registered always takes precedence. So there's a maxim in equity that says the first one that was registered legally, not illegally. Let's say there are two titles. One is dated 2000 and the other one is dated 2025. 2025. There are two titles, or 2000 and 2001. The one that was registered in the year 2000 takes precedence if it was registered legally. But if it was registered illegally, then it can be annulled and the right one issued. So if there are two conflicting titles, the one registered first takes precedence. Yeah, the first in title takes precedence. Now, what happens, Reverend, when you're also doing a search? I forgot to tell you about a very important document. Thank you for that question, which has reminded me. There's a document called a green card. Sorry? The question is, some people have backdated titles. Yeah? Now, I'm trying to answer it in this way. There's a document called a green card, or for properties that are leases, it is called a lease card. Now, that document shows the entire history of that property from the date it was given by the Crown. So there's a there's a document called the green card. You also need to get when you're doing a search, you can ask for a green card for freehold property and a lease card for leasehold property. Now, this green card has a history, the entire history of that property since the Crown Ordinance. We were talking about the British colony. By the time these people were actually handing over these documents and properties to us, it will have that history. So nobody can come and edit that document unless it is done fraudulently. Because there are cases where people collude with the people in the registry and it is done fraudulently. But if it is a property that is properly recorded, you get that card. It will show you in 1982, this property was owned by so-and-so. In 1997, it was sold to person X. In 2005, it was sold to person Z. In 2025, where this is the year you want to buy, it currently belongs to so-and-so. So that deals with the aspect of backdating of titles. Get a green card or a lease card. Yeah. Okay. When they are children, they are not. because it follows the hierarchy of the home. It goes from the spouse, surviving spouse, that is the first person, goes to the children. After the children, if there are no children, known siblings. If there are no known siblings, then it can go to the parents. Yeah, so when there are children, these in-laws are not entitled to that property. The children are the ones who are entitled. Yeah.
Father had two wives, they have died. But the father had a will, who is lawyer, but unfortunately children of one wife refused with the will. They say there will be no will. What will happen to the other children?
If there was a will and it was registered, find that will. But if not, you can approach the court and tell the court that there was a will, and they can be compelled to bring it out. The court can compel them to bring out the will. But even in the absence of that will, if your children of that other house, if they don't want to bring out the will, then what the court is going to do is to say and to order that the properties be distributed equally. So it is going to be a loss on their part if they don't want to bring out the will. Yeah.
When I sell a property, what is the percentage of fee should I pay to the broker? Does the law guide this?
Huyo ni mtu amefanywa mbaya na broker. I'm sorry. Ideally, not ideally, based on the law, the acceptable percentage is 3%. Acceptable percentage, let me say that. But there are others who ask for more, there are others who ask for less. What I would want you to do is to agree with the broker before and have it down in writing. Yeah, because they cannot, hawezi kuja waseme ati tulisema hii hapana. Have it down in writing. I'm going to give you 1%, because you can decide to give them 1%. If it's your property, you sell it the way you want. You can decide to give them 1%, but legally speaking, 3% is the minimum. But you can allow, if you agree with them at 1.5, 2%, 5%, it is up to you. But what you do, have it in writing. Please have it in writing. Yeah. Yes, you can. Because as we said, inheritance is based on the household. So if the husband is part of that household, he is entitled to that property. And by virtue of him being entitled to that property, you and your children are also entitled. So yes, you can, through court. Yes, that was an error, because as we've said, even females, women, and wanaume, tafadhali, even your children who are female, put them in those wills, because when those wills are challenged based on that fact, they will be annulled. So that was an error. Yeah.
What happens in a process where you are buying land from a company, then it happens the company had used the mother title for a loan, and unfortunately the company fails to pay, goes bankrupt.
Again, as we said, due diligence. You need to do due diligence on that property. So if it's a company that has what is called a mother title, legally they are called head title, but I think we understand them as mother titles. Do a search on that head title. Even if it's a portion that is being sold to you, do a search on the head title. So that it shows you where there is a loan on that property. If there is a loan on that property, you need to have an authority from the bank saying that if you pay this amount of money, they will give you what is called a partial discharge of charge on that specific portion. Because you can have a company owning 10 acres, but they are selling a quarter of an acre each, but they have a loan. So if you are buying a quarter of an acre, the bank or the financier must give you a partial discharge of charge for that specific property that you're buying, just to state that after you buy, they will not claim any money from that specific portion. Due diligence, again, yeah.
Is it good for a son to sell an inherited shamba from his father?
That is a heavy question, but of what use will that property be if it can't help that son? The reason why that property was being given to you is for it to help you. If you can avoid it, well and good. But if there is an opportunity for you to get assistance from selling that shamba, why not? Because the reason why it was left to you is so that it can help you. So if it is there and it can't help you, then it becomes a useless grant that you've been given. Those are olden days, kind of thinking, but I hope I've answered that question as well. Yeah.
Is there free legal help for women who are divorced from their husbands and denied matrimonial property?
Yes, you can go to FIDA, Federation of Women Lawyers. They can give you free advice on that. Visit FIDA offices, or if you have an advocate, approach them. They might be able to help if it's a situation where they, because even as advocates, we are encouraged to do work pro bono. There's some advocates who would help you, but if not, go to FIDA. FIDA will give you proper representation for free as a woman.
In a case where my husband dies and we had joint properties and I later all get married, does my second husband automatically get entitled to these properties by way of marriage?
Yes. And the two shall become. That is a nice place to end. And the two shall become one. It is true. They automatically, by virtue of marriage, yeah. Yes. Yes, sir. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Okay, thank you, sir. Now, if they are included in that will later on, it has to be based on equality. Yeah? It has to be based on equality. There needs to be some form of balancing that is done, so that at the end of the day, you can justify this gift that was given while the parent was alive. Because maybe a father gave a son property during his wedding, for example. You'd want to give your child a property because they were married, they're getting married, so you give them while they're still alive. That is theirs by virtue of you being proud of them as a son. They're getting married. You want them to start a life together, so you give them a property. Now, when it comes to the will, there has to be a justification of why you're adding more property to this child that you gave a property while you were still alive, so that the others do not feel left out. Because that is where the issue of equality comes in. You try and balance, because if you don't balance, it will be challenged. But what I would also encourage the young people who are here, whatever it is that is written by your parents as a will, accept it, because those are the last wishes of your parents. At the end of the day, you did not do anything to get those properties. Those properties are being given to you as gifts. So rather than spending 50 years or 20 years in court fighting over something you didn't even sweat about, you take what has been given. God is going to multiply it. Bwana asifiwe sana. Instead of spending 10 years saying that, you know what, I'm going to fight until I get, that is, backward thinking. Because at the end of the day, you did not sweat for that property. This property is being handed over to you for free. It belonged to somebody else who woke up every single day, went to work. By the grace of God, they acquired this property. Now they're telling you, you know what, I have this small property that I want to share with you. Accept it. Move on. Ask God to bless you. But if you keep on fighting for these properties, things won't go well. So in that case, if there was a gift that was given while the parent was alive, and they still want to include them in the will, they can do that, but with justifiable reasons. Yeah. I hope I've answered that question, sir. All right. So the love, yes? Yes. Yeah. No. or you can, okay, you can try. Let me say that. You can try to decline. But the court will not allow somebody who doesn't want to be with you to continue being with you. Because the courts usually are the ones that can only issue divorces. So if your, for example, wife says, I don't want to be with this man, and they give sufficient reasons, then the court will decline. You can't force the court to stay with a wife or a husband whom you don't want to, whom does not want to stay with you. So the court cannot force you. Yeah. 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 Yes. Now, thank you so much, sir, for the. Mhm. Yes. Okay. Yeah. Yes. Okay, thank you so much for that question, sir. Now, we go back to what we said, due diligence. So when you're buying this property, whether or not you are issued with shares, did these buyers do a search, conduct a search on the mother title? Because if they conducted a search on the mother title, the charge is basically what shows what is owned to the bank would have been there. Yes? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. Okay. If it is after, then the bank, yes, will have lien. Lien it just basically means they will have a right to that property. But these individuals who are affected can move to the court and have the court stop this bank from getting this money and get the directors of the company to be directly liable. There's something called the lifting of the corporate veil. Now, a company is separate from an individual. Yeah, because when you open a company is a legal person. We are natural persons, you and I are natural persons. Companies are legal persons. So when such a fraudulent activity happens, because that is fraud, number one, I would encourage for those members to go and report to the nearest DCI offices so that action can be taken against these directors, because that is a fraudulent activity, number one. Number two, now you can actually approach the court by virtue of being innocent purchasers for value, because you bought that property innocently and you did your own due diligence. There was no encumbrance in the form of a loan, but these guys went behind your backs and bought, or rather, and took in loans without your knowledge. So you can approach the court, and the court can stop the bank from laying claim. But that is going to be a very difficult case to win, because it is going to be assumed that the people who are going to be responsible are the directors individually. So even if the company is going bankrupt for whatever reasons, the directors can be held personally liable for the fraud that has happened, because that is basically fraud in so many words. Yeah. Yeah.
Let us agree that these two questions are the last because of time. I'm not looking behind because I can see many people. But let us just agree these two, the final ones, maybe we'll have another day. The
Yeah.
first one, what happens in cases of adopted children, either legally or not? Are they entitled to their inheritance in case there is no will?
Yes, they are. Children, as long as they can identify you as their father, you as their mother, they are entitled, whether adopted legally or not. If they can identify you as their father, yes, they are. But not just any other children. They have to prove that you took them in and you took care of them as children. So they are going to be entitled. Yes.
Final one. What about the family has done a successful succession,
Yeah.
but only to find they left other property not
Aye.
distributed?
Okay. You can go back to court and you revise that grant, because the final document that is issued is called a certificate of confirmation of grant. So you can apply to have it rectified. Rectified to include the properties that were not distributed. So that is not the end. So you can go back to court and say, there was this distribution that was done. We realized at this time that these properties are not included. So we would want for these properties to be included, and the courts will be more than willing to assist you. Thank you so much. I've enjoyed my time here. Yeah. 0726, for those who might want to get the same, 0726 625 951. 0726 625 951. May God bless you. May God keep you. May God make his face shine upon you. Thank you so much for having me. Nashukuru sana. If God wills, when we get another opportunity, I shall be available. I'm just a phone call away. Mbarikiwe sana. Thank you so much.